our priority in the state of Tennessee. That will not change. We want as many students in person as possible. We saw how significant of a decline that resulted from the disruptions from COVID last year. And we also know that we want to ensure that everybody is safe and that districts can implement common sense flexibilities at the classroom and the school level where it matters and where it is needed. And so this is what is within my authority for Commissioner waiver authority. And again, I can waive, I cannot create policy, I cannot create laws, no matter how much people may or may not want me to do that. And so this is the most reasonable way to address the current surge. Happy to take any questions at this time. The only thing I would want to add is from a process perspective, that waiver form was sent to districts, school directors on Friday. They are able to submit those waivers at any time. The department will review them at 9 a.m., noon, and 3 p.m. every day, and will provide those responses as quickly as possible, depending on the volume that we receive at any given time. Once those are submitted back to the district is then able to communicate if that waiver was granted at the school or the classroom level and make decisions accordingly. But to be clear, if a student is quarantined, a classroom is quarantined, or a school is quarantined, it is the expectation that those children are receiving the same number of instructional hours as they otherwise would have. It is an instructional day, and it is remote learning. It is not a day off. It is not a closure. It is moving to remote teaching and learning. So students should still receive the same commensurate level of instruction as they would otherwise have received in person. And so with that, I will turn it over to Victoria.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Thank you to everyone as well who has submitted questions. Please continue to submit those and we will get to as many as we can here. First question, a number of schools had to close prior to your letter to superintendents, and at least 10 districts announced last week that they would close this week. Will waivers be accepted for retroactive closures?
For closures that were announced for this week, if a district has made that decision, we will for this week entertain and review waiver requests. However, those waivers would be granted if remote instruction took place. If, for example, the district closed schools for the week and today they had a school building closure or used a stockpile day and no instruction was provided, a waiver would not be allowed for that because it's not an instructional day. So districts did have all weekend and they continue to have 9, 12, and 3 p.m. today to submit those waivers. If they want to do that, as soon as the waiver is granted, they would be able to transition from using a stockpile day to a remote day, effective as soon as that waiver is granted. But the requirement for instruction is still in place.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Next question. Is there a threshold or standard for how many teachers, students need to be out sick in order for a waiver to be approved?
Yep, so similar, and I know this came in before I provided that information, but I'll review just in case some new folks had jumped on. We want to make sure that we are being appropriately flexible and attuned to the local needs. And so when we have a state as diverse as Tennessee with very large districts and then very small districts, and especially when we are looking at the school and classroom level, we need to make sure that we are reviewing the local context appropriately. And so in some cases, that might be you have critical staff out, and so you cannot safely operate a school, and there are not additional adults within the broader district community who could be deployed to that school site. I'm thinking about a couple of districts where there are less than 10 people at the district office. So if you have a significant number of folks missing or quarantined or isolated at a school level, you actually can't replace those adults. Same thing if you think about qualified bus drivers, et cetera. And so we would want to take that in a very, very specific local context. Similarly, you might have other scenarios where you can be more creative and flexible with your staffing at the district level to support schools or classrooms. Again, and what I want to reiterate is this is not a rubber stamp process. This isn't just because you submit a waiver, it will be granted. It is up to the district to provide that information at the school or classroom level that shows that there is not a reasonable way in which they could maintain in-person instruction. That doesn't mean that that regardless of how they would normally operate schools, that just because they can't do it in that way, that is a reasonable justification if there are other solutions that can be in place. And so really it's about saying, look, we are at a point where it is not possible to safely have students in the building, and we have such a high quarantine or isolation population that we need to do something different. And we do not have a more robust set of adults or supports in our larger district community that could be deployed to help. And so again, we are going to take this on a case-by-case basis. I think really great language was used last week that I've borrowed and will copy, but it is a scalpel approach and not a sledgehammer approach. And so really making sure that we prioritize students in classrooms. We know they learn best. We know there are long-term effects of that, and we want to make sure that they get access to the best possible opportunities for a strong education. Parents can get to work, but we are also making sure that parents, districts, and school communities have flexibility at that classroom and school level.
Thank you, Commissioner. That was very, very helpful information. Again, as you all are joining us, if you were just joining us, please continue to submit your questions to the chat, and we will get to as many as we continue answering questions. Commissioner, next question. Does this waiver only apply to students out due to testing positive for COVID or quarantined, or does it also apply to students with underlying health issues or parents who don't feel comfortable sending their kids to school?
Great, really appreciate that question because it also lets me talk a little bit about the existing options that are available at this time. And so for the first part of the question, which does this waiver only apply to students out due to testing positive for COVID or quarantine? So I want to make sure to differentiate. There are those who are literally impacted because they either are positive cases or close contacts. There are those where the operations of the school are disrupted, and then there's parent choices. Or our parent choices. If there is a student or a staff member who tests positive for COVID, they must isolate. That is a requirement. If there is a student or staff member who should be quarantined because they are a close contact, an identified close contact, right now they can be quarantined at the school or based on the local board policy. Those are for identified close contacts who need to quarantine. That does not change. Those individual cases should still be aligned to local board policy in consultation with local health departments. What we are doing here is when you have the case where there is so much disruption as a result of those quarantines and isolation, that those students and staff who are not currently impacted, meaning those that are not positive and those who do not have to quarantine, you cannot reasonably continue to carry out school or at a classroom level. So for example, and this was an example from a district, from our district call this morning, you might have a classroom with a very clear seating chart, and we have one positive case within the classroom. And so let's say 75 or 80% of that classroom now needs to quarantine, including the teacher. That might leave you with a handful of students left in that classroom, but no teacher and no additional students. Technically, within the current board policy and rule, you would only quarantine those who you know are close, you can identify as close contacts. And because there's a strong seating chart, you know who wouldn't need to. Perhaps those children were absent and were not exposed. It might not be reasonable for that district to say, yes, let's have this classroom, have those 4 kids come in when the other 16 kids are quarantined at home with a teacher. So they might submit a waiver to request a quarantine for that specific classroom. And so those are for, this waiver is really about those who are not currently under quarantine or isolation. Separately, if you have parents who do not feel comfortable sending their kids to school because of maybe underlying health issues, parent preference, et cetera, we do have a number of virtual schools that are available. There are some that are available, seats that are available anywhere in the state. Some are specific to districts. Every district had the opportunity to request for a virtual school last spring and summer. A number of districts elected to do so, and many districts did not. But parents are still able to enroll their children in virtual schools if they want to have a completely remote or virtual experience, especially this school year or this semester. There are hundreds and hundreds of seats available in those virtual schools. They did not fill up. Frankly, there was not a big uptick in terms of families who have elected that option. That is still the choice that is available to families. I do want to just acknowledge, though, that this is the third year that is impacted by COVID. We obviously had the spring 2020, we had all of last year, and now we have this year coming up. And as a parent, I hope you know, I get it, that I would love to just go back to not having to live in a world that is so significantly impacted by COVID in our schools. But we do all have to make choices. So there might not be a choice where your local school is completely virtual. And as a parent, you have to make the call about whether you want to send your child to an in-person school, which is your local school, or you want to elect for a virtual school. That choice exists, but it is a choice that has to be made. This waiver process allows us to provide common sense flexibilities at the classroom and the school level.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for sharing that, and we appreciate it. I believe we have time for probably one more question. And as we continue that, we will answer this question. And if we are not able to get to your questions, please feel free to email that to us as well, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Next question, will there be a maximum number of students, classrooms, or schools in a district that can be remote?
No. So we will take those waiver requests on a case-by-case basis and ensure that we are looking at them in the current context. If a classroom or a school does ask for multiple waivers, so for example, if a school asks for a waiver, let's say next week, and then asks for another waiver again a week or two later, we would consider both of those, but there will be a point where if it's multiple consecutive waivers, we're gonna want to work with that school as well as the local health department to figure out whether all mitigation strategies are in place to the extent possible. And so really making sure that we bring in local health departments to ensure that we have really tried to control as much as possible within the school. And that means, and I was on the phone with health this morning, making sure we have very clear seating charts in classrooms and cafeterias, on the bus. There are lots of things that we can do to minimize the number of folks who need to go into quarantine and certainly contract the virus. And then I think there was another question that came in just about how many districts have submitted waiver requests. We've received one.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We will look through the rest, see if we have any option to answer any other questions. I believe we are running low on time. So if you all want to submit those again via email, we will be happy to answer those as quickly as we can. Final question, Commissioner, can you elaborate on the term reasonable given the statewide positivity rate is 18% today?
Yep. And so, the statewide positivity rate, I would defer to the Department of Health on that. I am not a doctor. I am not a health professional. I am an educator. And so again, different classrooms and schools are going to have different experiences in terms of what their needs are and what choices they want to make. Again, because it varies across the state, I think those decisions are best made at the local level, and we trust our local districts to submit those waivers for classrooms and schools with what makes sense for them. I've talked to a lot of districts that have found ways to ensure that they put in every mitigation strategy possible, and they've been able to contain a lot more. And there are other districts, because of community spread and other variables, where that hasn't been the case. And so from a reasonable perspective, I do think that needs to be very clearly at the local level and very specifically at the school level, because we know we've got large counties, and that what's happening on the east side of a county might not be the same as the west side of a county. And I think that it's really important that we look at that on a case-by-case basis. Again, that is what is within my current authority, which is the waiver authority. That's really important. I am going to answer this question because I do think it's important, and that's just around kind of policy and how that iterates. I understand that folks want to have, that everyone wishes that we could see 4 weeks into the future and make policy decisions based on that. I do want to be clear that as commissioner, my authority is waiver authority. I cannot create laws, I cannot create policies, and I cannot create rules. That is actually not what the Commissioner of Education does. I am able to waive things, and this common sense flexibility gives me that authority to do, and I'm enacting that. What I will say, though, is that we have seen tremendous impacts, especially when we look at the rest of the country. And I would strongly encourage those of you who are reporting on this to see what is happening in the other 49 states. New York City is in person. Most other states at this time are not offering or extending this kind of flexibility. And so while I think it is, we tend to focus very specifically on Tennessee, which is important, from a national perspective, all of our states and many of our large districts and communities continue to react to and try to work with the changes that existed with this variable. I was in schools throughout the summer, as you all know, on the bus tour, and that was in June and July, and we were not in this place. Coming into the beginning of this school year, we saw a significant uptick in the number of youth and child cases of COVID-19 because of the Delta variant. As a result, we've worked with a number of external partners, the General Assembly, the administration, of course, and health professionals, et cetera, to determine what is the most appropriate path forward. Last year, we had CLPs at the district level. That is not currently an option that we are using at this time. Again, what I do have the authority to do is this waiver process at the classroom and the school level to provide common sense flexibilities. We join a handful of other states who are providing that level of flexibility as a result of the surge. Many states, again, have not yet even entertained this conversation. And so I understand the frustration of wanting to have a black and white, one size fits all. It's always going to be this way or always going to be that way, and the policy is never going to change. But that is not what is appropriate in terms of responding to an ever-changing COVID-19 scenario. I do believe that this provides districts with the flexibility that they need at this time. I am more than happy to continue to have these conversations, and we talk to superintendents regularly. I talk to all of them once a week. I also talk to many of them every day, and we will continue to be responsive to what is happening with this virus and continue to prioritize the need for in-person instruction. Because what I do know to be true is in 20 years, the first graders that we have today who are just 6 years old, when they are 26, when they're turning 30, when they're 35, we are not going to look back and give them excuses and say, well, they were COVID kids in first grade, and therefore we don't hold them to the same expectations. They are going to have to live their lives and be successful in their careers, and we have a responsibility to provide them with the highest possible quality education. This is a long-term issue that we are going to be dealing with. We are going to be supporting these kids for years. And so I can't just think about right now. I have to think about all of the things that come with this very, very terrible virus, both now and as I think about my kids in the state, 1 million of them over the next several decades of their lives. It's really, really hard, y'all. It's hard for our districts. They are struggling and they are working really hard. So is the Department of Education. So are our communities. I really ask that you provide that level of support for our districts in terms of reporting the great things they are doing, as well as the struggles they are facing. They are doing amazing work. I would like to see more of that in terms of highlighting the wonderful practices that have been in place, the things that they are doing, the districts who have seen growth even after such a hard year. And frankly, I do think most of us will be in person for the majority of this year and do everything they possibly can to provide their children with the highest quality education. It's what they do every day, and I trust they will continue to do that.
Well, thank you so much, Commissioner. Appreciate those closing words. We hope you all have found this helpful. If we were not able to get to your question or you have additional questions, you know how to reach us. Feel free to email us at edu.mediainquiries@tn.gov, and we will get back with you as soon as we can. Thank you again. Hope you all have a great Monday.